so what is it that you enjoy most about your job?
Oh, it's so fascinating to watch people struggle and struggle and struggle, and then you can come along with some simple tools to say, hey, have you thought about this? Did you think of framing it this way? I've got a couple of little tricks in my large bag of tips and tricks that you can try. And sometimes the magic happens, and what looked like an impossibly complex decision simplifies, and then doing the right thing becomes obvious. And it's just so satisfying from an intellectual perspective, and also just helping people do better at their jobs and do good in the world.
Hi, Michelle Florendo here, and welcome to Ask a Decision Engineer. Listen in and find out how to untangle big decisions with less stress and more clarity. In today's episode, again, I'm featuring voices from members of the Society of Decision Professionals. This time, to explain some of the ways tools from our field are used in practice. Whether they call it decision analysis, finance and decision engineering, or structured decision making, you'll hear how they've seen these tools used to tackle decisions big and small, across fields like energy, pharmaceuticals, consumer products, natural resources, and even sports and entertainment. This season was made possible in partnership with the Society of Decision Professionals. First, you'll hear from Basil Stumborg, a decision analysis expert who weighs in on why he loves his job. How did you first learn about this? What was your introduction?
That's a great question. I think growing up on the west coast of Canada in the 1980s and the 1990s, the war in the woods, logging old growth forests, disappearing salmon, and also needing to power our economy, those trade-offs were very real and very much in my face, and I was always fascinated by how someone would do that. If I was king, how would I actually strike that balance? And I'm not king. And there's lots of different people who have different ideas, and that just adds to the complexity, which to me makes it more interesting.
Okay. So can you tell me more about the work you do and how you apply some of these tools in the big decisions that are being made in your org?
Yeah. So I work at BC Hydro. It's our provincial electric utility. And at BC Hydro, I am our decision analysis expert. So I have the best job in the company. And I help our executive whenever there's a complex decision. And complex means there's no right answer. There's no way you can science your way to figuring out the right answer, because it depends on competing values and value trade-offs. And it's not just the money, but it's also non-financial impacts, like the trees and the fish and the indigenous peoples and economic development. So how do we approach complex decisions? And my job is to help frame those up so the executive clearly sees what the trade-offs are, and then they can bring the corporation's values to bear when thinking about what the best option is.
Okay. And you're saying all of this, so for those of you listening, he's saying this with a smile on his face, and so I can tell when you say you've got the best job, you really mean it. And so what is it that you enjoy most about your job?
Oh, it's so fascinating to watch people struggle and struggle and struggle, and then you can come along with some simple tools to say, hey, have you thought about this? Did you think of framing it this way? I've got a couple of little tricks in my large bag of tips and tricks that you can try. And sometimes the magic happens, and what looked like an impossibly complex decision simplifies, and then doing the right thing becomes obvious. And it's just so satisfying from an intellectual perspective, and also just helping people do better at their jobs and do good in the world.
I have to agree with Basil. One of my favorite parts about my job, whether I'm coaching someone through a tough decision or teaching about decision skills, is witnessing people's aha moments, when a previously tangled mess of a decision suddenly becomes clear by employing a simple concept or framework. But more importantly, he highlights one of the many situations where this field can be really useful: complex decisions where there are objectives beyond just the bottom line, like on environment and society, and leaders need to be able to navigate trade-offs in a way that still aligns with their company's values. Personally, I think that means every leader in every company could use this, but I'm biased. Of course, there are also specific industries that have benefited from decision analysis due to the unique nuances of decision making in that space. Next, you'll hear from Eyas Raddad, who you heard from in the previous episode, explain why decision analysis can be so useful in the pharmaceutical industry, where drug development decisions need to balance sometimes competing objectives, and the feedback loops on the outcomes of decisions are long. The industry is highly regulated, and as a result, R&D investment decisions are high risk and high reward. And can you tell me more? I know you mentioned some of the decisions that you're facing within the organization were really complex, but what kind of decisions are we talking about? Like what types of applications are there for this field?
At the time when I started asking questions about how we make decisions, I was in drug development teams and they were in early phase 1, phase 2. A lot of the decisions that we were making were around what dose to select, the trade-offs between the benefit and harm or the safety and efficacy. Also decisions on go, no go with the molecules, with the projects, or sometimes link decisions across different projects. Should we take both projects forward if they're attending to the same ultimate therapeutic need versus only take one or take two to a certain point in the future and then make a decision. Some of these kind of option related decisions that we're making. But since then I had been working on many different types of decisions, more recently at the portfolio level, how to prioritize projects, what makes a project better to even start compared to others, as well as, which is more anchored in portfolio theory, if you will, and also general therapeutic strategy questions like, or decisions like which indications should we pursue and which biology areas should we invest in that would help us achieve the ultimate goals of meeting those needs.
In industries like pharma, where huge decisions are not easily reversible and the stakes are high, with both billions of dollars and people's lives on the line, how do you know when you've made a good decision? That's where decision analysis and decision quality can help. But applications of these tools aren't limited to huge multi-million-dollar decisions. Sometimes it's about the impact of making improvements across a huge volume of decisions. Here's Tyler Ludlow, who compares and contrasts his work in two different industries. So I want to hear more about how this type of structured thinking, how did you apply it both in the consumer packaged goods space and then also in pharma? Very different industry.
Very different industry. At a very high level, the differences between, like at Unilever in the CPG space, we had hundreds of product launches a year. Right? Whether that's new deodorant or a new soup or ice cream flavor or boxing on there, like tons of stuff, right? So we used to internally, when we would put on training and whatnot for folks to be involved and learn the skill set, the mantra was always, if we make each individual project decision better, we'll win some, we'll lose some. But on average, we'll come out ahead of our competitors, right? Or we'll be the best version of ourselves that we can as a company, so the most successful version. I think the pharma space is really different than that, right? I can remember in some of my days at Lilly, man, if we could just target one launch a year, that was like uber successful, right? Hadn't been done too often. The industry has changed a little bit more recently with things, but so the play there is how to sustainably manage a portfolio over time where it is high risk. It's also dramatically high reward for each. You finally get one across the line and it's several $billion a year in revenue. Like that's just so different than a new deodorant scent or something like that. So the challenge there is just balancing on any given project, balancing the cost, the time, the risk, the reward, and then the other challenge is to do that across a portfolio, right? Where you're not always able to make that portfolio decision at one time. You're deciding now, and how you decide now either enables or precludes future decisions on future investments. So that distancing and time sequence on the decisions is hard too.
By now, you've heard a couple people reference portfolio theory, which is something that has a strong overlap with the quant side of decision analysis. In fact, that's why the full name of my track of study at Stanford was not just decision engineering, but finance and decision engineering. How do you make good investment decisions? P.S. It's also why a bunch of my classmates went to work on Wall Street after graduation. Here to explain a bit more about portfolio theory is Tony Kenck, who also recently published a book on the topic.
I got an MBA and learned about efficient frontiers in my finance class, and that kind of triggered me to learn more about portfolio theory. And while at Chevron, I sort of apparently made it my life's mission to bring portfolio concepts and planning and methods into Chevron. And it's a little bit outside of some of the normal DA stuff, which at Chevron at the time tended to be more project focused, but it was a good home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for anyone who's not familiar, what is portfolio theory and portfolio management?
Yeah, so Harry Markowitz won a Nobel Prize for his portfolio work in 1960 or something. It's about making, in terms of investments, making the highest return with the least amount of risk. And it applies more generally to companies that want to, say, get more revenue for less capital, or want to achieve other targets like safety targets or environmental targets while still hitting their financial targets and goals.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the spaces or industries where portfolio management is used?
So besides finance, I mean, every time you call your investment advisor, he's going to run a portfolio analysis for you and tell you, oh, you need to put more money in, or you need to shift money from stocks to bonds or bonds to stocks or whatever. But besides that, well, so a few things. First of all, there's a lot that's been done in pharmaceuticals, exploration in oil and gas, but there are other fields too. You know the movie Moneyball?
Yeah.
That's portfolio analysis and management in the context of baseball.
Right.
And so it's becoming more and more ubiquitous in many areas of life and business and entertainment. So.
Okay. Well, so as it's becoming more ubiquitous, where else do you see there could be applications of this?
So my push, the work I've done, is more about managing portfolios of assets generally. But one of the other applications is in things like public policy. There's a TED Talk, Bjorn Lomborg. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's an interesting character. He's an economist from Denmark, and he put together a consortium, a Copenhagen Consensus it's called, of sort of experts across fields of human problems, I'll just say, but things like disease, nutrition, climate, all these things that the world has to deal with at some level. And he took the data from like the IPCC climate stuff and took publicly known data about all these things, brought in these experts, and started looking at what would it take to fix these things, how much money and how much benefit would we get from it. So cost-benefit analysis. And it, he has his results. He did a TED Talk on it, so I'll let anyone be their own judge on it. But everyone hates him, but which is one of the challenges with portfolio, because people have their pet projects, and when their pet projects don't float to the top, they get mightily annoyed sometimes. So
because they're focused on their pet project as opposed to the health of the entire portfolio.
Yeah, essentially it's about getting more for less, getting more benefit for less cost, however you want to measure benefit and cost.
Okay. So any setting where you are making decisions and are wanting to get the most out for what you are putting in, there are applications for this field. Who doesn't want to get more bang for your buck? As Tony enjoys the quant side of this type of analysis, David Matheson emphasizes that there's also another side of it. Tell me more about, I guess, what industry or industries do you currently apply this type of thinking?
I am all over the map. My focal point tends to be innovation and portfolio management. So this is where innovation is when you have something weird and wacky going on and you want to get it more serious, and then portfolio management is usually a combination of analysis, which people are pretty big on in this community, but also actually the social side of conflict resolution and bringing those two things together. So those problems show up more or less everywhere. In terms of like the branded, where people say, yes, I need decision analysis, it happens fairly rarely. If you go into other companies, say agriculture, or I've worked in silicon chip tools, or materials of various kinds, it's simpler ideas. It's like, where's the upside coming from?
So here in this field, we deal both with numbers and the people side, managing the downside risk, but also maximizing the upside. What else do we do? Here's Andrew Thrift speaking to what he's seen in his organization. Tell me more about, because you mentioned you saw the opportunity for some of the things that you've learned in this field to help with some very real problems that you were seeing. So what are some of those challenges that you found this is useful for?
One of the kind of problems or use cases that was the main driver initially was working on quite complicated issues at some of our mines with companies working with, where we had very clear kind of cost and engineering traditional drivers, but very complicated interwoven regional water quality, indigenous participation, local government, transboundary issues. So the poor engineer would want to make a decision based on cost and schedule, and he'd pluck a part of the spiderweb and it would reverberate, and there'd be all these other different dimension, different regional scale things, and they just don't have the tools for it. So you'd be in discussions with a steering committee where they'd talk through all the complex reputational and environmental protection, and then they'd come back to, if I spend this much, I get this much more removing that load of contaminant from the water. And you'd see them think through it all and then come back to the familiar quantitative, and it just, I could see this is not an optimal way, and the poor engineers are scratching their heads, and the environmental and social scientists were having trouble figuring out how they brought these big risks that they were managing into the conversation in a way that they could see how it was going to follow through in the decision. But there's been lots of other applications that are much more, immediate and short-term, and their pumps plugging on this groundwater well, and let's do a little framing session of talking through what do we know, what do we understand, what are our options. So it started out with something big and unwieldy, and found it's worked quite well with things that are much smaller but still benefit from a structured thought process.
Andrew Thrift describes how mining decisions create spiderweb effects. Engineering choices ripple across environmental, social, and regulatory issues. Without structured tools for decision-making, teams revert to more narrow thinking, missing crucial trade-offs. Decision analysis helps integrate these diverse considerations for both complex, large-scale challenges and smaller operational problems. This episode showcased decision analysis across diverse industries. Utilities like BC Hydro use it for complex trade-offs between economic, environmental, and social impacts. Pharmaceutical companies apply these tools to high-stakes drug development, balancing safety and efficacy while managing billion-dollar portfolio decisions. Consumer goods companies can improve hundreds of product launches annually. Portfolio theory appears everywhere, from financial investments to sports to public policy priorities. Whether it's mining operations balancing engineering with the environmental factors or innovation management across Silicon Valley, these structured thinking tools help cut through complexity when there's no single right answer. Stay tuned for my next episode, where we explore even more applications of decision analysis beyond the realm of quantitative analysis. See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you know of someone who might benefit from learning more about how to make good decisions, please send them a link to our website, poweredbydecisions.com/podcast. The website poweredbydecisions.com is also the place to go if you are interested in more resources on decision making or would like to submit a question to potentially be answered on a future episode. Again, this is Michelle Florendo from Ask a Decision Engineer. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.